One of the most eerie types of disappearances are the ones where people vanish in the dead of night. No clues or eyewitnesses left behind, just utter darkness and mystery. We are going to talk about 3 such disappearances today. The first one, there is next to nothing known about the actual disappearance. The second one, we only know the first half of the story. As far as the third one, well, if I were to rank the disappearances I've covered or even read about as most bizarre and having no plausible explanation, this would be at the top of the list. It is a very rare case where we have a good idea why she may have disappeared, but the bigger question is how. In addition to the mysterious element, all 3 of these cases also took place in Canada. Let's first talk about Mabel Crumback. The first disappearance will soon turn 75 years old, but the details are as uncertain today as they were back then. In many of these cases, we have a pretty good idea what happened, but with this case, we really don't know the circumstances surrounding the actual disappearance at all. Sheldon and Helen Crumback lived at 661 Willard Avenue in Toronto, Canada, with their 3 children, 19-year-old daughter Mabel, and sons Bruce 11 and Gary 8. On Saturday, May 27, 1950, the couple had gone to Detroit that weekend to attend a wedding. Bruce was also gone for those few days, so Mabel was in charge of babysitting her brother Gary until her parents returned on Sunday. In addition to looking after Gary, Mabel would make the most of her weekend by spending time with her boyfriend, 17-year-old James Bryan. The couple was said to have enjoyed a pleasant day of listening to the radio and playing tennis on May 27, 1950. As James recalled, he got to Mabel's house at 11:30 a.m. and didn't leave until 12:30 a.m. that night. He said that Mabel had seemed completely normal and was in good spirits all day. Around 12:30 a.m., James Bryant left Mabel's house, but promised he would return the next day for Sunday dinner. When he came back the next day, he wasn't prepared for what he saw. When James arrived back at the Crumback home that morning, he noted that all of the doors were closed, but not locked. He knocked on the side door, and when no one answered, he went inside. He then noticed a note that Mabel's brother Gary had written to his sister. Gary had gotten up that morning and couldn't find his sister. He wondered where she was, but didn't really worry about it. He then made his own breakfast and pinned a note to the wall for Mabel, telling her that he was going out to play. James found Gary and asked him where Mabel was. Gary said that he'd wondered the same thing. James said then his heart dropped to his toes. James and Gary searched the house and yard. When a neighbor stopped by to ask what was going on, he told him they couldn't find Mabel. They questioned another neighbor, and when no one had seen her, they then phoned the police. The police did take quick action in trying to find Mabel. More than 400 people searched using walkie-talkies, shortwave radios, maps, police dogs, and a small plane. There wasn't much to work with at the Crumback home. It appears that an outfit was missing from Mabel's room, possibly the one she wore the night before, said to be consisting of a check shirt, blue plaid skirt, black suede shoes, as well as a comb. Reports also said the bed appeared to have been slept in, but had been neatly made up. Under Mabel's pillow was a neatly folded pajama bottom, however the pajama top was missing. Her purse and money were in her room, her slippers were in the kitchen. Mabel's parents would return the same day Mabel was reported missing, and were shocked to find out that their daughter was not there. The family stated that Mabel was very diligent in keeping the door locked, but when authorities arrived that morning, the front door as well as the side door were both unlocked. What is perhaps the most perplexing clue was the lack of clues. There was absolutely no signs of a struggle or violence, and nothing had been disturbed. But where was Mabel Crumback? Sheldon and Helen Crumback would tell police that their daughter was very responsible. At age 19, she already had a good job as a bookkeeper for Eastern Steel Company, and they expected that she would be getting married soon. They insisted that there was no way she would have left willingly. They believed that she must have been abducted or was perhaps suffering from amnesia. James was really perplexed as he had just left his girlfriend several hours earlier and everything was fine. Of course, the police did question him, but it seems that James Bryan was never considered to be a suspect in this disappearance. By all accounts, him and Mabel had a good relationship. When questioned by reporters, James did say that the couple was very serious about each other, but he was only 17 and wanted to wait until he was 20 to get engaged. The only one who might have answers as to where Mabel was or what may have happened to her was her brother Gary, but he was at the young age of 8 years old. The police did question Gary, of course, and he did hear some things in the night, but it's hard to gather much from what he heard. He heard their dog bark and possibly even a dog fight. He heard thumping. He thinks he heard human voices, predominantly male, and he heard a sister in what he described as high-pitched laughter. It was believed it was around 2 a.m. when he heard these strange sounds. It wasn't enough of a disruption to pique his curiosity to get up, though, apparently, as after he heard the unknown sounds, he went back to sleep. Then when he woke up the next morning, he went to find his sister, but she was gone. Not long after, James would arrive, and when they couldn't find Mabel, the police were alerted. The neighbors would add a little more information to this mystery with what they had observed that night. A few of them heard voices raised. One said they heard a scream around 2 a.m. There was even a couple who claimed they walked past the Crumback home shortly after 2 a.m. and heard loud noises, as well as noticed the lights on in Mabel's room and the kitchen. So it seems pretty likely that something happened in the house in the middle of the night involving Mabel, but what? As usual, there were plenty of people who claimed to see Mabel after she went missing. Most of them, if not all of them, were false. It seems, though, in this case, the sightings almost took on a life of their own. In fact, I found more articles about the false sightings than the actual disappearance. The first sighting was on June 10, 1950, 2 weeks after Mabel disappeared. Mrs. Wesley Jenn operated a campground that also had a restaurant and service station in Ancaster, roughly 50 miles from Toronto. A strange girl thought to be around Mabel's age approached Mrs. Jenn at the restaurant, and she was certainly memorable. She kept saying that she was Mabel Crumback. She was with a man who was 30 to 35 years old, and the couple seemed nervous. She said she had been with him for 2 weeks, and her hair was normally dark, but he had made her dye it blonde. The girl acted as if she was drunk, but didn't smell of alcohol, so it was thought she could have been drugged. She was wearing a pink sheer gown and was unsteady on her feet. She said she was wearing a wedding dress, but didn't remember getting married. She also told Mrs. Jenn that she was being held captive and to phone police. The couple stayed briefly. The man then put $2 worth of gas in a 1936 black sedan with a trunk rack in the rear, and they drove off. Mrs. Jenn would eventually phone police after being told that there was a Mabel Crumback who had been missing for 2 weeks. All efforts to find the mystery couple failed. When Mabel's mother was told of this bizarre sighting, she thought it could definitely be her daughter. After having experienced heartless and bizarre prank phone calls for 2 weeks, one person even pretending to be Mabel, nothing fazed her, and she said, "Some madman and a handful of dope could have done this to my girl." The second sighting was on June 12th, just a little over 2 weeks after Mabel disappeared. A farmer named Albert McAllister found a strange girl sleeping out in the open on his farm in Mount Pleasant. She was described as 5 foot tall with dark hair. Apparently the farmer had made a noise that woke her, and she fled in fear across a hayfield. She was seen to be carrying a paper-wrapped parcel. There was another farmer in the same area who reported a similar occurrence, with a mysterious dark-haired girl running away in fear. The sighting was made more interesting when it was learned that Mabel's grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. George Crumback, lived in Oakland, which was just a few miles from Mount Pleasant. Mabel actually had some other relatives who lived on Mount Pleasant Road, which was only a few hundred yards from where the mystery girl was found sleeping. An airplane was sent to fly over that area soon after the reported sighting, but the unknown female could not be found. There was another sighting reported in the newspaper on August 28, 1950, of a woman working in a Brantford restaurant. She was questioned at the police station, and Mabel's relatives were brought in and said it was absolutely not Mabel. I found it strange, though, that in the newspaper's words, this young woman at the restaurant fit the description, except for her hair and eyes. That makes me wonder how her appearance even matched Mabel's. The next significant mention of Mabel's disappearance would be two more instances a few years later, and to say these stories were odd would probably be an understatement. This is a pretty convoluted story, but in an article from 1956, 6 years after Mabel disappeared, a dentist from Galt named Dr. Harold Mason apparently had an interest in hypnotism. In a meeting at a Mr. and Mrs. Club event, Dr. Mason brought a subject named Jim. He refused to have his last name mentioned and refused to be photographed. He was married with children and was a war veteran who had previously suffered a head injury that required months of hospitalization. In a technique called magnetization, he puts Jim under and, with encouragement from Dr. Mason, he starts to talk about Mabel Crumback. He said that she had been hitchhiking and was murdered by being bludgeoned with a pipe. He even named the man that he said was responsible and said he was from a town in Michigan and was 38 years old. He said at the time of the murder, the man was driving a 1939 black Chevrolet sedan. He goes on to say that Mabel was clubbed to death at 4 a.m. He says during his trance that he could point out to where Mabel was buried. The audience at this meeting had mixed reactions. Some were dumbfounded, while others treated it as a joke. Jim goes on to draw a rough sketch of a map where Mabel's body was supposedly buried. The Expositor newspaper got wind of this supposed revelation and arranged to be there when Jim went to the scene where he thought Mabel was buried. Police were there and did dig an area up that Jim directed them to, but to no one's surprise really, no trace of Mabel was found there. The next mention about Mabel's disappearance is almost laughable. It did serve a purpose in getting her story exposure again, and I understand that out of desperation, her family was willing to listen to anything at that point. It involves a 28-year-old horse named Lady Wonder. The horse apparently responds to questions by muzzling levers that raise letters and numbers while questioners look for clues. When the horse was asked by a newspaper reporter where Mabel Crumback was, the horse chose the letters to spell in Maine. Her mother was willing to try anything to find her daughter, so she did write to some newspapers in Maine about Mabel's disappearance. The only real response mentioned was someone from Maine who wrote to Mrs. Crumback about seeing a dark-haired girl with a French accent. The mother said the horse was thought to be accurate about some other cases, so why not Mabel? Sadly, this just served as more of a distraction and false hope than any real help. The most recent mention of Mabel Crumback's disappearance that I could find in local newspapers is actually pretty heartbreaking. 35 years after the disappearance, in February of 1985, the law firm of Wilson, Jack, and Grant placed a small notice in the newspaper asking anyone knowing the whereabouts of Mabel Crumback to come forward. Apparently the Crumbacks had kept their daughter in their will, never giving up hope that she might resurface one day. Her parents eventually passed away in 1983 and 1984, and the will was in probate, but Mabel was still listed as a beneficiary, so by law the notice had to be placed in an attempt to locate her. Unfortunately, no one came forward. The second case we're going to talk about happened a few years after Mabel vanished and not far away. There are some unsettling similarities between these disappearances. In this case, we know the first half of the story, but the second half is still unknown over 70 years later. Marion Joan McDowell was 17 years old and also lived in Canada in Scarborough Township, which is about 42 minutes from Toronto. She was said to be very close with her parents, and her mother was described as a semi-invalid. Friends and family would also describe her as fun, outgoing, athletic, and had numerous admirers. She had made plans to go with her current boyfriend on the night of December 6, 1953. As she left the house, she was quoted as saying, "Goodbye, Mom, I won't be gone long, I'll be home early." She then left to go for a drive with her new boyfriend, 19-year-old James Wilson. The couple ended up parking James' 1942 Plymouth Coupe in a Lover's Lane area on Danforth Road. They were there about an hour and a half when at around 8:30 p.m. a man pulled up near the couple in a dark 1948 Plymouth or Dodge. Their night would suddenly take a dark turn. He was said to be about 5'8", and apparently pulled a balaclava, similar to a ski mask, over the lower part of his face. He was said to be wearing an army-style raincoat. He pulled a flashlight from one pocket, and in his other pocket it was assumed that he kept his hand on his gun that was hidden. Soon after, Jimmy's door was yanked open, and he heard the unknown man say, "This is a holdup, get out." At first Jimmy thought it was a prank, but then he saw the barrel of the gun pressed against his ribs. He was told to hand over his wallet, and he complied. The man told him to turn around, and when Jimmy did, he was apparently hit twice, presumably with the butt of the gun, and then knocked unconscious and fell to the ground. A couple that was parked down the road heard a scream, where it is thought that Marion then was probably assaulted with the gun as well. When Jimmy did regain consciousness, he claimed he was in the car, partially in the back seat, and that the car was in a field with the engine running. He said that Marion was on top of him and she wasn't moving. He then fell unconscious again. When he woke up for the second time, Marion was gone and he was in his car alone on a strange lane. He saw the assailant nearby standing next to the black sedan with the trunk up. He sees him put something in his trunk. Jimmy then gets in his car and, still unsure of exactly where he is able to drive to safety. He alerts the police and they go to the original spot where he was attacked. Police would search Jimmy's car and find Marion's coat, sweater, and purse. They also noticed the rear seat was bloodstained. Police could not find any evidence at the scene except a reported new bar of Sunlight soap sitting next to its wrapper in between where the two cars had been. Jimmy was taken to the hospital and had reportedly lost a pint of blood. He would need 17 stitches to close his head wound. Nearby they would find Jimmy's wallet covered in blood with the original $10 still in it. Jimmy Wilson was of course investigated. He was even transported to Buffalo, New York for a polygraph because they were not allowed in Canada at the time, which he passed with flying colors. Also, he had a pretty significant head wound requiring several stitches, and it wasn't believed that he could have inflicted that type of injury on himself. There were intense searches for Marion, and the family would receive terrible prank phone calls that were even described as sadistic. The calls would include maniacal laughter, with voices saying, "I'm getting ready to murder your daughter," and one voice saying, "Let's kill her now." One caller would say that Marion's body was in a barn 13 miles northeast of the kidnap scene. There was even a ransom note requesting $50,000 in $2 bills, in which the caller said that once he received it, he would give them valuable information. Astrologer A. Frederick Jackson also weighed in and said that the stars revealed that Marion had drowned after being attacked and that her body may never be found. He described her possible assailant as a former false friend of short stature. Marion's disappearance would bring up the Mabel Crumback vanishing again, with comments in various newspapers mentioning the similarities between the two cases. There was also an article in September of 1954, about 9 months after Marion disappeared, where a shop owner and his wife were positive that they had seen her in their store the past Saturday. Police would eventually get to the bottom of it as they found a woman who closely resembled Marion McDowell named Rita Oliver. She would be questioned, though, and proved her identity. Then, in an eerie coincidence, just a few days after Marion's disappearance, her co-worker and close friend Norma Schreiber would be found strangled to death in her apartment. There was a newspaper article that talked about how scared the other secretaries were where Marion and Nancy worked, which was in a billing office at an engraving firm. It said they fainted after hearing the upsetting news and would soon quit their jobs. There had only been 4 secretaries in their department, and within a few days, one was murdered and another was missing after a violent kidnapping. Nancy's husband, Joseph, whom she had separated from 3 weeks earlier, was arrested pretty quickly for her murder, and her parents blamed her husband's drinking for the crime. There wasn't thought to be a connection between Marion McDowell's disappearance and Norma Schreiber's murder. However, in an article in the Times Colonist from December 15, 1953, an unnamed co-worker said that prior to when Marion had vanished, the married couple had quarreled over the missing teenager. The search for McDowell was very extensive and said to be the largest of its kind at the time. During one of the searches, Marion's uncle made a horrible discovery. On Don Mills Road, approximately 20 miles from the Lover's Lane abduction area, he found a black skirt, bra, single silk stocking, and kerchief, all stained with blood. Police were trying to confirm if these were what Marion was wearing, but I never found an article after confirming for sure that it was. Another avenue in investigation concerned a date book that Marion owned. There was a particular man that Marion had written in there that police were searching for. They were unsure if he had anything to do with the crime, but police wanted to question him. I'm unsure if this could be the same youth, but Marion's family said that a boy who used to roller skate with her had called her 3 times in the last month and threatened her with violence if she refused to marry him. In yet another strange development, there was an old suit coat and hat found on Hogs Hollow Bridge in suburban Toronto. In the coat was a note with Marion McDowell's name, along with the address 937 St. Catherine Street, Montreal. What is even stranger is that police say that that address does not exist, but said that they would look into this mysterious clue further. Police were frustrated after all their effort that they couldn't find Marion. They would also admit about a year later to newspaper reporters that because of the huge amounts of blood left in the back of Jimmy Wilson's car after the assault, they didn't think that Marion could have survived her attack. Sadly, there have been no new developments in this case, and Marion McDowell is still missing. The last mystery we're going to talk about is Cindy Weber. There isn't a lot about this case anywhere. Only an entry on the Blogger website and a few newspaper articles, mostly from the Edmonton Journal, is all that I found. Her immediate family is gone. It's honestly pretty depressing to tell this story, but I look at it as a way to keep Cindy's memory alive. Now let's get into this mysterious disappearance. Cindy Weber did not have an easy life. She had endured some very troubling events. At only 22 years old, she'd already endured more than some of us will ever go through. She was born in 1959 to Arnaud and Edna Weber and lived in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Genealogy records state that she had 2 brothers, Kenneth and Ronald Weber. Tragedy would strike the Weber family early and often. According to the records I found, Her father, Arnott, died in 1972 at the age of 50. In the next few years, Cindy would lose both of her siblings soon after, with Kenneth dying in 1973. Some reports indicate that he ended his own life, but I couldn't find verification of this, just a few months after her father's death. Although the details are unclear, her surviving brother Brian died a few years later in 1976. Both brothers died while only in their 20s. So Cindy had lost most of her immediate family while still a teenager. Cindy's mother stated that she never got over the grief. This would no doubt at least contribute to her spiraling out of control for the next several years. In her teenage years, Cindy would battle drug addiction. Her mother attributed this, in part anyway, to the death of her brother and father within months of each other. She was close to both of them and took their deaths hard. During this time, she had a history of running away and was hospitalized no fewer than 6 times for drug overdoses. Then around 1979, at the age of 20, Cindy would make a decision that would completely change her life in a devastating way. Cindy was hospitalized in an Edmonton hospital for treatment for her drug addiction. Cindy was in a deep depression and while in the facility, tried to end her life by hanging. She was found in time and rescued, living through the horrible ordeal. But what would come of her injuries due to the suicide attempt would turn out to be Cindy's worst nightmare come true. Cindy would suffer serious brain and neurological trauma due to the incident. Her vision was now very impaired, and she needed the use of glasses. The physical effects were also life-changing. She couldn't walk unassisted. She was on various medications to control her violent shaking. She would have to use canes, and even with them was barely able to be mobile and needed the use of a wheelchair. She was described as an extremely troubled and lonely person. Probably the most prolific part of her injuries is that Cindy lost her ability to speak. This was devastating to her. It appears that she would think clearly but could not verbalize, and any communication she made would be writing on an alphabet board. This was completely frustrating for her, as you can imagine. She had so many thoughts and feelings that she wanted to express, but was left silent. Cindy was still in there and had hopes that with therapy, she could regain her ability to speak. After her horrific injury, Cindy would become a permanent patient at the Glen Rose Rehabilitation Hospital in Edmonton. She was allowed to come home on the weekends, however. Cindy hated being at the hospital with a passion. With her lack of verbal communication, plus not being around people her own age, which Cindy really craved, her situation seemed to be growing increasingly desperate. Then just when Cindy thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. The hospital informed her and her family that they would be discontinuing her speech classes starting in June. They didn't feel that Cindy could improve in that regard. In fact, they wanted Cindy removed completely as they didn't feel that her physical and neurological issues would ever improve. She was very upset at this news and even tried to run out of her wheelchair after hearing it, but of course didn't get far. It is said that Cindy stated she would rather die than return to the hospital. This devastating news would cause her depression to grow even deeper. Then on Saturday, July 18, 1981, Cindy was home for a weekend visit at her family home at 13511 118th Street in Edmonton. Her mother, Edna Weber, remembers it being a good day. Cindy had spent a lot of time outside in her wheelchair enjoying the sunshine. She then went with her mother that night to see a movie. Edna would get Cindy ready for bed and tucked her in around 10:30 p.m. But what she would find the next morning was not to be believed. When Edna went to check in on her daughter about 6:45 a.m. the next morning, she was completely shocked to find her daughter gone. Edna Weber was incredulous. How could her invalid daughter be missing? There was no sign of a struggle or anything at all being disturbed in the house. There was absolutely no sign that anyone else was in the house besides the two of them. Her glasses were there, her wheelchair, the medicine she needed to keep from shaking uncontrollably. Everything had been left behind. The only clothing unaccounted for was a white sunsuit that it appears she was wearing when she left. Nothing was missing except Cindy. Edna Weber, still in shock, looked around outside. She even checked the nearby park in case Cindy could have somehow dragged herself out of the house, but there was absolutely no sign of her daughter anywhere. The only possible clue is that Edna did say the back door was open and she was certain it was locked the night before. After having no luck in her search, Edna then called the Edmonton Police Department to report her daughter missing. Police did an exhaustive search looking for Cindy. They had 4 search dogs search the area around the house multiple times with no luck. Cindy lived in a residential area, so if she was even somehow able to get herself outside, perhaps that was why the back door was open, she couldn't have gotten far by herself, and the numerous searches produced absolutely no trace of Cindy. Edmonton Detective Ernie Speake referred to the case as the most unusual case he's had to deal with in 23 years of police work. Her mother would eventually post a $5,000 reward for information for her daughter's whereabouts. She even got so desperate that she would speak with psychics who were of no help. In a newspaper article later in 1981, her mother said with tears in her eyes, "I try not to talk about it, but I can't help thinking about it. I don't hold much hope that Cindy's alive. Let's face it, where would a crippled girl go for 3 months?" They interviewed family, relatives, friends, and hospital workers in hopes of getting some clue as to what could have happened. They spoke to Edna Schaffler, who was Cindy Weber's citizen's advocate. She echoed what her mother said, that Cindy absolutely hated living in the hospital. She would get upset every time her advocate would leave. She would scream and yell, frustrated even more that she couldn't express herself in words. Edna recalls trying to help her walk on one occasion, and they couldn't even get out the door. Cindy had absolutely no sense of balance. Even with someone assisting her, she would fall. The rehab hospital where Cindy spent most of her time resented any possible blame being put on them. They were limited by what they could say due to confidentiality laws, but insisted that they always took good care of Cindy. They explained that facilities such as Glenrose Hospital, which was an acute care hospital, typical stays are usually around 6 weeks before they are either sent home or to a long-term care program. Cindy had been there for 18 months, and the care she received there was more of a maintenance level. They also said that there were plans to send her to a facility where she could be around people her own age when she disappeared. A possible avenue of investigation for law enforcement was, could someone have helped Cindy to disappear? Everyone who knew her would have definitely known how upset Cindy was with her current situation. Police did investigate and talk to anyone who would have had any contact with her at the hospital, and even gave several lie detector tests. The hospital was adamant that she didn't have any visitors other than close family for the past year. The idea of someone helping Cindy disappear seemed to be a dead end, but that just makes this disappearance even more bizarre. What in the world happened to Cindy Weber? Now it is time for my thoughts on these 3 disappearances. As far as my thoughts on Mabel Crumback, 2 different scenarios come to mind. At first I thought maybe some random home invasion. I did check out the house on Google Earth, and it is on a corner lot with a busy street running beside it, so it seems very easy that someone could have entered that side door unnoticed at first. Perhaps Mabel had just gotten into bed and heard someone enter. If there was no car there, since the parents were gone, and the house was dark, perhaps they wanted to rob what they thought was an empty house. I would theorize that she probably put her clothes back on over her pajama top to go see what the noise was. I do find it strange that she would have had time to make her bed up as well as change her clothes if she did hear an intruder. Also remember that, whether the abductors knew this or not, Mabel knew that her little brother was asleep in the house. She would have possibly complied and been agreeable to be taken to protect her little brother from harm. A heartbreaking but possible scenario. Or since Mabel seemed to have redressed herself, at least partially, is it possible that the person let her get dressed or throw a few things on and then she was taken out? I think there is at least a chance of that. It doesn't seem like there was enough of a commotion to alert the little boy, so it's also possible that Mabel could have known the intruders. Either way, sadly, I believe Mabel Crumback was probably killed that night, and the girl in the sightings was not her. As far as my thoughts on Marion McDowell's abduction, sadly, I think she met with foul play soon after she disappeared. It is certainly possible that it was just a random attack. If this was a known lover's lane and the perpetrator just wanted to take a girl, perhaps they watched the young couple pull over and decided to abduct the female. Sadly, those kinds of crimes have happened many times. As far as Marion's abduction and her coworker Norma's murder, there really isn't anything out there that indicates they could be connected. It was mentioned that one of their coworkers said the couple argued over Marion, but no further details were given. Unless he was also one of Marion's admirers and wanted to abduct her for whatever reason. But there's not enough information out there to even give that as a cogent possibility. I do think that there's a good chance that Marion was abducted by someone that she knew. It is said that she had many admirers, and there was at least one whom her family mentioned that was harassing her, and there may have been others. That may have been why they covered their face. Also, contrary to what the assailant said, it was not a robbery because Jimmy's wallet was found with the $10 still inside. It was also mentioned in a newspaper article that there were thought to be as many as 6 cars parked along that lover's lane that night. Yet only the car with Jimmy and Marion came to extreme harm. So it seems that Marion was the target. My thoughts on the Cindy Weber disappearance are wow. This one is a real head scratcher. Let's first talk about whether Cindy left by herself. By all accounts, she wasn't mobile, as in she couldn't have left on her own. But what if she could have? Would it be possible for Cindy to have gotten on the floor and basically dragged herself across the house and at the door? As I mentioned, the back door was found open. The problem with that theory is, once she got outside, where did she go? I looked up the house on Google Earth, and it is in a residential area, meaning no wooded areas nearby. If by some almost miracle Cindy got herself out the door, I really don't see how she would have gotten so far as for them to never be able to find her. Cindy could hardly see, and she'd left her glasses behind, and without her medication, she would be shaking uncontrollably. Could Cindy have met with foul play? It doesn't appear that that is what happened. There was said to be nothing disturbed at the house, and her mother was in the house and heard no commotion, nor did any harm come to her. It's hard to imagine someone evil enough to take a handicapped, completely defenseless woman out of her bed and do her harm. Sadly, those things have happened before, but in this case, I don't really think the facts that we know make this a likely possibility. Now let's talk about whether someone helped Cindy Weber leave. Police seem to do a comprehensive job of talking with everyone who encountered Cindy in the last year at the hospital, even submitting lie detector tests, and could find no one who would admit to having a hand in her disappearance. No one who admitted to it anyway. Could there be someone who saw Cindy struggle at the hospital, whom she confided in using her whiteboard, that she wanted to end her life? Cindy did have a sympathetic story for sure, and it isn't hard to imagine that someone could have felt sorry for Cindy and wanted to help her. But let's talk about that a little further. For someone to help Cindy in this scenario, it would almost be certain that he would have had to end her life, or at least help her to end hers. That's a pretty heavy request, especially for someone who appears that she didn't know well. I certainly don't think that her mother had anything to do with her disappearance. She seemed genuinely shocked and puzzled that Cindy was gone and did what she could to try to find answers. But even if someone thought they were helping Cindy, they would have basically had to kill her and dispose of her body, which goes beyond just wanting to help out a suffering person. The only theory I could imagine that makes any sense, and no theory in this case makes perfect sense given the circumstances, is that maybe there was someone from the hospital that agreed to help Cindy that night. Could she have arranged for them to pick her up that night and bring her somewhere where Cindy had made the choice to end her life where no one could find her? It does definitely seem like, at the time of her disappearance anyway, that Cindy could have been suicidal. She had tried to harm herself before, had horrible neurological issues, was unable to speak, and given the hospital was discontinuing her therapy, maybe everything was just too much for her. It is heartbreaking to think of how horrible the last few years of Cindy's life were. Just as horrible as Cindy's family basically having to grieve for her, even though they never found her, but knowing that she couldn't have survived long after leaving that night. So there you have the 3 stories of little-known missing person cases. All 3 of these ladies are from Canada. Each disappeared under different circumstances, and their cases are all ice cold. There is always hope that information will come out one day to further explain where they are, as well as to what happened to cause them to be gone in the night. I also wanted to mention something exciting about the Dale Kerstetter case. His case was my first 2 podcasts that I released, as well as 2 articles on my blog. A brief recap of the story is that while working as a security guard at Corning Glass Works in Bradford, Pennsylvania, in September of 1987, Dale went missing along with a substantial amount of platinum. Popular Mechanics has a feature article about Dale and the platinum theft in the May-June 2025 edition, so please check it out. It is available where magazines are sold, as well as a digital and audio version. It is great to have his story get such a huge audience. So that concludes the bizarre stories of the disappearances of Mabel Crumback, Marion McDowell, and Cindy Weber. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please feel free to leave me a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find my podcast on Amazon Music, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or Apple Podcasts, listed as one word, Lost and Found Podcast. I also have social media accounts under my blog name on Facebook, X, and Instagram. I have a Patreon account as well under Lost and Found Podcast, and my email is lostandfoundpodcast@yahoo. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.